What I want you to understand is that this is something that you should get used to seeing in your planner, used to seeing on your schedule, because your self-care is that important. It affects your relationships. It reflects how you function at home. It absolutely reflects how you perform at work. And so it's all interconnected. It certainly affects how you feel about yourself. And so if you've been feeling like you're in a rut, if you've been feeling down, then my friend, I want you to take a step back and make some space for self-care in a really intentional way. Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Magic Podcast. I am really excited about today's topic. Today we're talking about self-care. That's right, because we need to have the conversation. Because if we really get real, right? Do you know what self-care is? Like, do you truly understand what it is, And I want to know, do you even make time for it? And it's fine if you don't, no judgment here, but I'm here to encourage you to make time for that because it matters. To me, self-care is meaningful maintenance. In fact, I want to read something from the book for you to hear because I think it'll be helpful. Self-care is meaningful maintenance. It's the practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's own health. For clarity, self-care isn't the overly indulgent shopping spree after a mani-pedi like TV and movies have sold it to be. It's a discipline that requires you to show up for yourself deliberately in some version every single day. What I've learned is that being present consistently cannot happen without being still intentionally. Another thing that must be pointed out is that self-care takes time. This is why most of us try to skip it, because we tell ourselves the lie of not having enough time. It's not true. You do have enough time for the things that matter. But the other lie you have to stop telling yourself is that everything matters, because it doesn't. Different things will matter in different seasons. Your job is to be explicitly honest with yourself about which things matter now. That was in the Health is Magic chapter in the book. And when I was getting ready for this episode, I was skimming that and I was like, you know what? I need to just read it. I don't even need to trim the fat. I don't need to change anything because I still feel exactly the same way. We'll talk about the actual or literal definition of self-care later in this episode. But in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to make more time in an intentional way for self-care. Do me a favor and share this episode with one friend who you think could really benefit from it. I think so many of us have the conversations with our friends or even some of our family members about making more self-time for us. And when you share the podcast, it helps us to grow this podcast because when you share the podcast, we can reach more listeners who need it. And that's a big deal. So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it so much. Thanks. When I was writing this book, it was so funny because my sister surprised me she booked a room at the Four Seasons for me just to have a day to myself. I had a lot going on. I was writing the book and I had a pretty tight deadline and the kids were 6, 3, and 1. So it was a party at my house. And we even still had construction going on. We were having the basement built out. Things weren't finished yet. And we had to just do a lot. And my sister was just so thoughtful and considerate. She got me a room. And it was so funny because I had this 24-hour self-care day when I was writing the Health is Magic chapter and I was talking about self-care. So I don't think it was a coincidence. I definitely think that all of that aligned very, very purposely, and I'm so thankful for it. What I know for sure is that as a mom of 3, as an entrepreneur, as a wife, is that self-care takes time. And I think for so many of you, it can be really, really tough to justify taking that time out. I think between justifying taking the time for yourself, feeling guilty, maybe because you feel like you're taking away from something or someone else, it can be really, really hard to do that intentionally. But what I do honestly and truly believe is that self-care is a discipline. It's not supposed to be comfortable. It's simply supposed to make you better, you know? And what I've really learned is that over the years, you've got to be wildly deliberate about making space for your self-care. It makes you a better person. It helps not only your life at home, it helps your life at work, it helps your relationships, and you overall reap all these benefits simply because you are going out of your way to practice self-care. And so in this episode, you're going to learn how to make time intentionally for self-care. Now, for this episode, I've created a resource, the self-care schedule and checklist, because I think so many times we try to practice self-care off of our memory, right? But life is full. There's so many different things going on. So just having a checklist of things that you need to do on a daily, weekly, and even monthly basis to practice self-care is so helpful. In the resource, we also give you space so you can write down what you need to do for self-care for your schedule. So if you're interested in this resource, you can head on over to maddiejames.com/009. That's maddiejames.com/009. So you can figure out how to get this self-care schedule and checklist, which is available in my private community and more in the resource library. Okay, y'all, let's get into it. So first things first, we've got to talk about the different types of self-care. So just like between researching, not only for this episode, but even when I was writing the book, I got to learn a lot about self-care and what it actually is. Self-care is basically taking the action. It's the practice of taking action to preserve or improve your health and well-being. Now, your health is basically the condition of not having any illness or injury. And then your well-being is the state of you being healthy and happy. So when you are being super intentional about not having any illness or injury and being healthy and happy, and you're focusing on that for yourself, that, my friend, is self-care. Now, there's 5 different ways that you can do it. So I want to break those down, but then also ask you some questions so you can start to think about it. There's physical self-care, which is taking care of your body. So, of course, this can mean anything from working out to even eating nutritious and healthy foods. Now, what would your life be like if you healed your body or if you had the most healthy version of your body? Then there's spiritual self-care, which is taking care of your heart. Yes, absolutely, it's taking care of your spirit. But when we think about spirituality and we think about faith, what you believe stems from your heart. So when it comes to spiritual self-care, you must take care of your heart. Now, when you take care of your heart, these are things like praying, even journaling and really understanding what's going on in your heart. An act of kindness is actually an incredible spiritual self-care practice. So my question for you is, what would your life be like if you healed your heart? What would your life be like if you healed your heart? Then there's emotional self-care, which is taking care of your feelings. Now, these are things like therapy, journaling, even just stopping and taking some deep breaths can certainly help you overcome feelings of overwhelm. So my question for you is, what would your life be like if you understood your feelings? Then there's social self-care, and this is incredibly important. I think sometimes we tend to overlook how important relationships can be to our self-care. So this is taking care of your relationships. So this can be something like calling or going out with a friend. This can be date night with your spouse. This can be one-on-one quality time with one of your children. What would your life be like if you prioritize relationships that matter to you? And lastly, there's psychological self-care, and that is taking care of your thoughts. So these are things like being creative, going out and walking in nature and just really consuming the environment, especially an environment that's aesthetically pleasing to you. And this is also learning new things. So my question for you is, what would your life be like if you had positive and clear thoughts? What would your life be like if you had clear and positive thoughts? So these 5 types of self-care really do matter. And I think oftentimes we can focus on one of them and not all of them. But the truth is that they all matter, and they will transform your life when you prioritize them. And so I really do want you to go out of your way to make time to take care of yourself in all 5 of these ways. It really does matter. Yes, different seasons will call for different things. You are going to have to take care of yourself in different ways depending on what's going on. The way you take care of yourself when you have a newborn isn't the way you take care of yourself when you have small children, which isn't the way you take care of yourself when you have teenagers or when you're even an empty nester. But what I do want you to realize is that taking care of yourself in any and every season matters in all 5 of these ways. So go out of your way to make sure that you're being honest with yourself about exactly what you need, and then make space in your life and your schedule to get it done. Let's talk about the types of self-care appointments, because I'll be honest with you, it does take time. It does take time, which is why we're here. This is the whole point of the episode. And you will have to make appointments every week, every month, every quarter, or even every year. And you'll even have to schedule some stuff every day to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So what I want you to understand is that this is something that you should get used to seeing in your planner, used to seeing on your schedule, because your self-care is that important. It affects your relationships. It reflects how you function at home. It absolutely reflects how you perform at work. And so it's all interconnected. It certainly affects how you feel about yourself. And so if you've been feeling like you're in a rut, if you've been feeling down, then my friend, I want you to take a step back and make some space for self-care in a really intentional way, and make some space for some of these self-care appointments that I'm about to share. Let's talk about annual self-care appointments. Now, this can be anything from seeing your general practitioner, seeing your gynecologist, or even your dentist. But I want to ask you a question. When's the last time you made an appointment for yourself with any of this stuff? I have realized that I am good at making sure that the kids have these appointments. But then when it comes to myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't been to the dentist in 2 years. And that's just not okay, because I'll be honest with you, I want my kids to have a mom who has good teeth. And so making sure that I make my dentist appointment does matter. So make sure you're going out and seeing your gynecologist. Make sure you're seeing your general practitioner. Make sure you're seeing your dentist, and making those necessary annual appointments, because it does matter and it does absolutely contribute to your self-care. Another annual appointment that you need to make for self-care is a vacation. When's the last time you took a vacation? And if you are a mom, then I'm going to dig a little deeper. When's the last time you took an actual vacation? Not a trip, because that's simply what it is when the kids are there. It's not a vacation, it's a trip. And trips are nice. I'm always grateful when we can take a family trip. But when's the last time you've taken a vacation? Maybe it's just you and your spouse. Maybe you just took a solo day vacation just to have time to yourself. Vacation is self-care, and at least once a year, you should be making space for it. So let's talk about quarterly and monthly self-care appointments. To me, these are things like a massage or a facial. So skincare is healthcare. We talked about that in one of the earlier episodes when we were talking about making your skincare routine magic. However, I also want you to know that a massage is absolutely self-care as well. Not only is it a way to relax, I know some people don't necessarily find it relaxing. I am very ticklish. So when I started getting massages early on, I was like, how is this relaxing? Because I didn't feel that way. But it's so great for your muscles. It's so great for your circulation, especially depending on what kind of massage that you're getting. So don't overlook those treatments as something just frivolous and indulgent. I think when you time it in a really deliberate way, like, I don't know if this is something you need to be getting done on a weekly basis, and maybe it's not in your budget to get it on a monthly basis. But I do think a handful of times a year could be really, really helpful to your health, your circulation, and how your body feels, especially if you've been working out or you have an extremely physical and even emotional stressful job. So definitely make sure you're making space for monthly and quarterly appointments for things like facials and massages. Now, while I would love to see her on a daily, even a weekly basis, I think on a monthly basis, it's really great to make sure that you touch base with your best friend or your group of really close friends. I don't think we are talking about how important prioritizing FaceTime, like in-person, face-to-face time with our friends is. It is so, so important. And I would even say that if you have a particular job, maybe you are a creative freelancer, and you spend a lot of time by yourself, I would even go out of your way to see if you can get into some some meetup groups where you are with other like-minded professionals, so you also don't feel so isolated in your work. For most of us, we work every single day. So to be around other people who understand the pressures or the different trials and tribulations that just come with work really, really is helpful. So don't underestimate FaceTime with your close friends or with like-minded professionals like you. Making time on a monthly or quarterly basis for that is certainly going to contribute to your social self-care. On a weekly and bi-weekly basis, you certainly want to make appointments for things like your hair, your nails, and things like therapy. Depending on, your budget, your needs at the time, you can do therapy on a bi-weekly basis, a weekly basis, or a monthly basis. I have done all three, Of course, it's just depending on the season that I'm in. But I really think that going out of your way to make those appointments that regularly can be really helpful. Things like just making sure that your nails are taken care of. You don't have to have long, fancy nails, but just making sure the health of your nails is good is really important. And if you're not somebody who wants to go and get them done, you prefer to do it at home, make sure you make an appointment with yourself in your planner and get it done at home as well. And then, of course, there's daily appointments on a daily basis. And this is really just going to be appointments with yourself. You want to make sure that you're getting ample, high quality sleep. Depending on the season you're in, if you have kids especially, that's going to look different in all the seasons, I'll be honest with you. But if you can't get a high quantity of sleep, then definitely make sure you're setting yourself up for success to get high quality sleep. So let's get rid of the screens an hour before you're going to bed. Let's make sure you're not eating right before bed, and that you're really letting yourself be hydrated, not consuming alcohol right before you go to bed, because all of those things do contribute to the quality of your sleep. Things like working out can absolutely help with your quality of sleep as well. And even just sitting in silence. Sitting in complete silence, my friend, is more therapeutic than you could ever imagine. And so getting up 30 minutes to an hour before your family gets up is worth it, in my opinion, to make sure that you can fit in that type of self-care. Resting without sleeping, just sitting down and resting. So yes, maybe that means you're scrolling, maybe that means you're watching television, but I also want to encourage you to practice resting without having to stimulate all of your senses. I know that we all have a smartphone. We all have streaming, so it's easy for us to just aimlessly consume entertainment. But I think it's important to mindfully rest and to not be stimulated and to just chill out. That is really good on a daily basis. Next, let's talk about self-care being about you being a good steward. That's what self-care is really about. Self-care is about you being a good steward. I think that we've had many conversations. We've heard it before. So many people feel guilty. They feel like when they're taking time out for themselves, that they're taking away from their kids, they're taking away from their spouse, they're taking away from their work. You might even view it as a waste of time. And my friend, it couldn't be further from the truth. I think also it's easy to say that you're so busy, right? Between motherhood, between housework, between outside commitments, between just like having relationships with other people, you're like, I'm just too busy for self-care. And that's also not true. You make time for what matters to you. And what I'm trying to tell you is that self-care has to matter to you. And I want you to also realize that you want self-care, right? Which is, preserving or improving your health. You want it to matter now before things become extreme and you have to focus on your health simply because you have to, because it's a life and death situation. So you're not too busy for it. I want you to make sure that you're going out of your way, just like you go out of your way for your kids, you go out of your way for your spouse, you go out of your way for your job or your business. Make sure you go out of your way for yourself because you're worth it. And I'm going to stand 10 toes down and remind you every single time I get the chance to. So do not blame your lack of self-care on anybody else because it's not anybody else's priority but your own. The second thing I want us to make sure that we're being honest about when it comes to self-care being about you being a good steward is that you are not your own. You're just not. You're just not. And we have become really entitled, but I want to be very clear that your able body, your sound mind, your optimal health, right? All of these things, your senses, all of these things, your thoughts and ideas, all of these good things are gifts from God. And when you practice self-care in a really deliberate and healthy way, this is your way of showing gratefulness and showing worship to God. This is you being a good steward. So anytime you want to feel guilty about being a good steward by taking care of yourself, working out, by going to therapy, by praying, by journaling, by learning something new, that's you being a good steward. Do not let anyone, and I mean anyone, stop you from being a good steward. Being a good steward always matters. And self-care is a way that you do that. And also, release the guilt. Free yourself of the guilt. This is not anything for you to feel guilty about, especially when you give your time wholeheartedly to your home, to your family, to your community, to your church, to your job, to your business, to your friends, your sorority sisters, your this, your that. When you show up and give your time to all those other things, do not feel guilty for giving your time to yourself. And what I want you to understand is that when you show up for yourself and do self-care, all these other people that we just mentioned are beneficiaries of that. So do not feel guilty. It is part of your priorities in life. It is your responsibility. Take that seriously. Let's talk about the discipline of self-care. So one thing I really want you to stop doing is to stop winging self-care. I think a lot of times it's just like, okay, I'll get to it. Oh, I need a facial. And you'll say it out loud, or you'll say it in conversation with a friend, or even just like scrolling and you're chatting on Threads or X or whatnot, and you'll say it, but then you won't do anything about it. So write down what you need in your self-care. Stop winging it. It's the whole point I created this self-care schedule and checklist. When you see it, you can do it. But when you don't see it, it ends up being put on the back burner in your mind and essentially in your life. So let's stop winging it when it comes to self-care. If we say we're going to prioritize it, then let's actually write things down. Make sure you write what you're going to get done down in your planner, not on some random list, not on some like random notebook that you won't even look at. Write it in your actual daily planner, write it in your calendar, and make sure that you can see it and make it part of your schedule and essentially a part of your life. Then also, to make sure that you're practicing this discipline and taking it seriously, ask for what you need. Here's the thing, as much as we want to preach self-care, and yes, it is about you taking care of yourself, you don't share your life by yourself. You share your life with other people. So when you are trying to make sure you're making space in your life, in your schedule for your self-care, make sure you're touching base with people like your spouse, your kids, your boss, your employees, whoever you need to touch base with, depending on how your life is designed. You want to make sure that you're telling people, hey, in 2 weeks, I'm going to be taking these 2 hours out because I've got to go to therapy. In the morning, I need an hour to myself because I need to pray and journal. I actually need to make sure this evening I get a bath in so I can relax for the really big day that I have tomorrow. But for people to take you seriously when it comes to your self-care, you've got to set appropriate expectations. When people see you winging self-care, they won't really take you that seriously. When you are telling people 2-3 weeks in advance, if you're trying to share a Google Calendar like, hey, Maddie's therapy session next Friday at 2 p.m., if I'm sharing that with Chris, he's kind of got to take that seriously. Because not only does your self-care affect your time, but it also affects other things like your budget. So if you're sharing a life with your family, it would behoove you to let them know what you're doing. When we try to be secretive or last minute with our self-care, people then can have resentment or some, negative feelings with that. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to be happy with what you're doing when it comes to your self-care, but you do want to establish really healthy boundaries by setting clear expectations with everybody you need to chat with in your life. Last but not least, understand that this discipline of self-care is about benefiting all of the relationships in your life. You are going to be better in every single aspect in your life because you practice self-care in your marriage, in your motherhood, in your career, at entrepreneurship, whatever have you, in friendship for sure. Because when you are taking care of yourself deliberately, you're much more secure. You're much more planted in who you are and who God created you to be. If you want to remember or know who God created you to be, take care of yourself. He will definitely let you know in the best of ways. Because again, self-care is about you being a good steward. And anytime you are a good steward, not only will you gain fruit from this, but everybody in your life gets to reap the benefits of this harvest. And I cannot harp on this enough. As a mother, you practicing self-care shows your children that this is a really healthy habit to have and that they get to see mommy happy because she takes care of herself in a really deliberate way. So they might have not understood why you are gone every Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. But when you start explaining to them that you went to therapy, that you feel a lot more confident about yourself, when they see that you are noticeably happier and joyous to be with them, my friend, that is a positive thing. And not only does it become something that benefits you, but what happens is your self-care ends up being a really good example for others. Last but not least, how do you make self-care magic so it matters? Well, let's talk about it. How do you make self-care meaningful? Well, here's a question I want to ask you. In this season of your life, how do you need to be taken care of? How do you need to be taken care of? When it comes to aesthetically pleasing, what are some really great things that you enjoy? When it comes to aesthetically pleasing, what's good for you that you enjoy doing? What's good for you that you enjoy doing? Let's talk about goal-oriented. Now, when you take care of yourself, how will this help you accomplish your goals? How will this help you accomplish your goals? I know for me, if I get more sleep, guess what? I'm actually going to show up and wake up early and actually get that workout in because I made sure that I got high quality sleep. So those are the things I want you to start thinking about. Let's talk about intentional. Who do you need to chat with and collaborate with so you can get the appropriate space and time to practice self-care in your life? Who do you need to chat with in a really intentional way? So yeah, maybe it's your spouse like, hey, I really want to do this I really want to do this quarter. I really want to get this massage. It's going to cost a couple $100 because it's a really good, spa. How can we make space in the budget for that? Or maybe it's your boss like, hey, on every last Friday of the month, I would like to leave early so I can have a therapy session, right? I think having those really honest yet intentional conversations will absolutely allow you to have more space, time, and even money for your self-care. And last but not least, how do you make your self-care consistent? When are you going to write it down in your planner? And when are you actually going to get it done? When are you going to write it in your planner, put it on your schedule, and get it done? When you do that, my friend, that's how it becomes a consistent practice and a habit in your life. And so, my friend, that is how you intentionally make more time for self-care, okay? You want to partner up with all the people in your life and let them know like, hey, I need the space, I need the time, I need the money for this self-care. You want to understand that this is you pretty much setting a great example, not only for yourself, but certainly for your children and the other people who love you in your life. You want to understand that there's more than just one type of self-care. There's psychological, there's social, there's spiritual, there's physical, and of course, there's emotional. Self-care matters because you matter. And you, my friend, anytime you take care of yourself, anytime you go out of your way to intentionally take care of yourself, that is you being a good steward and honoring God for the gift of your life. Don't let anybody ever take that away from you. Well, that does it for this episode of the Everyday Magic Podcast. I hope it helped you. If you haven't already, please share this episode with just one other person who you know would benefit from this. When you share this podcast with others, it lets us grow the podcast to get bigger and better in every single way. Now, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you have an extra 60 seconds, go ahead and leave a rating and review. When you guys leave ratings and reviews, it helps more people find this podcast, and I deeply appreciate it. If you're not already, be sure to follow me on Instagram over at the Maddie James. That's TheMattieJames. And if you're interested in the resource that I created to go along with this episode, the self-care schedule and checklist, head on over to maddiejames.com/009. That's maddiejames.com/009. So you can find out how to get the self-care schedule and checklist, which is exclusive in my private community and more in the resource library. All right, y'all, I think that is it. Love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. I'll see you guys in the next episode.